Hey everyone, what up? Matt Kaiser here. Star Ocean and Tales. Two of the topics I cover a lot on this channel, mainly with their newer releases being Star Ocean and the Divine Force and Tales of Arise respectively. And such, both series have a lot in common, both being action RPGs, both being born around the mid-90s, and being now over 25 years old, and both even having the same main composer, but mostly for like Tales being Motoi Sakuraba, and both having sort of similar themes and similar feels, despite both of them having distinct features, like with the Tales series being more fantasy with a few bits of like sci-fi, while Star Ocean is a mix of both science fiction, space opera with medieval fantasy integrated in a way. And I just want to found an interesting idea, and I recently got a copy of Star Ocean Divine Force on Xbox and have it paired up with my Xbox copy of Tales of Arise. And yeah, I have to say that honestly both really just look awesome, and it gave me an idea honestly of what those two games represent for their respective series and as a whole. And it got me thinking, if Star Ocean and Tales are considered rivals, mainly for the first games, what about the other games in between, like say it and like say their newer ones? Like, do all the other Star Ocean games have a counterpart to Tales series? And before we find out, by all means, if you're interested in Star Ocean or Tales, then like the video, hit that subscribe button, and click that bell to get notified on all Star Ocean, Tales, or any RPG updates. Now back to the video. So this got me thinking, of course, is that do all Star Ocean games have each a Tales counterpart to it? And if so, what are those games in particular, and mostly why is that the case? So I think we will all go start from all the way from Star Ocean 1 all the way to Star Ocean 6. Obviously I'm not going to include stuff like say, Star Ocean Blue Sphere or Star Ocean The Nemesis, because they're not really mainline Star Ocean games. But other than that, I think we shall hit where it all began first. And we kick off where it all began, and that was Star Ocean 1, or First Departure as we call it. Now, if you watch my iceberg on Fantasia, as well as the retrospective for Star Ocean, you would know that Star Ocean was obviously born out of the whole conflict with the developers, that being Wolf Team, and how some of them moved on to Tri-Ace, to make Star Ocean. And it's very clear that Star Ocean's rival to what it is of course Tales of Fantasia. I mean, obviously Star Ocean came out a year after Fantasia, and it was meant to be a rival of some sort. And obviously the devs had ideas to counterattack it, as they weren't impressed with Fantasia's battle system and on how it handled its whole story. So they wanted to go more deeper with the combat and deeper with the story. Hence why they have things like a skill system and private actions, of course, which are staples that we know Star Ocean at best. And obviously both of them are similar. They're both released for the SNES. They're both action RPGs. They both have Motoi Sakuraba working on the soundtrack. And both have bandana protags with Cress and Roddick respectively. As well as they even have Demon Lord bad guys with, of course, Daos and Asmodeus. And even have a similar beginning with the whole where the main protagonist's family and friends suffer a horrible fate, honestly. And yeah, I think that is the case. Now obviously Fantasia has a lot more releases than Star Ocean. That obviously Star Ocean only was on the SNES until it got a PSP remake and localized, and then later a remaster for the PS4 and Switch, while Fantasia was on the SNES, the PS1, the PSP with its remake, the awful GBA port, as well as also having a direct sequel, and also having even an iOS port, which was obviously cancelled. Not only that, but both games even have like prequels, which would later be translated as obviously later Tales games. Like there'll be like one of the later Tales games and Star Ocean games would serve as prequels, even though they're more standalone, but still prequels nonetheless. So yeah, I think it's obvious that both Star Ocean and of course Tales of Fantasia are the true rivals in the case. So my pick for rival for Star Ocean 1 First Departure would be unanimously Tales of Fantasia. Next up we have is Star Ocean 2 The Second Story, or Second Evolution as many call it. And yeah, this one is a little bit of an interesting one, and that is, well, the fact that I think that the closest thing to the rival of Star Ocean 2 is WoW. I do think that Destiny is the rival to it, because both of them actually have some things in common. Actually, I mean, both have, blonde-haired bandana pro tags with Claude and Stan respectively, and both are the most popular games in the respective series at the time. I mean, hell, even Star Ocean 2 is still the most popular Star Ocean game out of them all. And both did so much for the respective series, of course, with Star Ocean 2 obviously selling well and being effective in the West, and obviously introducing tropes that we would love to see in all of Star Ocean. As for Tales of Destiny, again, it did the same thing. Obviously, the most common thing that it obviously brought out was the introduction of skits, which is what became a staple in the series. So much so that later releases of Fantasia, its predecessor, would get those skits, and obviously skits are a massive staple for the series, and obviously they're defined by those skits, at least one part. And as for, well, obviously Star Ocean 2 has the whole split story with the whole dual story with Claude and Reyna, and while Destiny does not have something close to that, the other thing it does have is its PS2 remake, where they did have like a sort of a split story with Stan and Leon, but it's not as in-depth as, say, obviously Star Ocean 2, because for Destiny it was most about just picking the Destiny experience with Stan's side, and just picking a new experience from Leon's perspective, which was more shorter in a sense. And yeah, obviously a lot of influences from it and Destiny, both Star Ocean 2, would also imply for its predecessors. Obviously, I mentioned that, well, Destiny would bring its skits to Fantasia, while in the case of when remaking Star Ocean 1, they used the engine of Star Ocean 2 to look exactly similar to Star Ocean 2. Obviously, Star Ocean 2 would get an overhaul PSP remaster, and yeah, just absolutely wonderful. I absolutely think that was a good move. Obviously, I do wish that obviously Tales of Destiny remake would have been ported and obviously amazing, but hopefully that happens, Bamco. And obviously it's the same unfortunate case with Star Ocean 2's remaster, where while it is on PS4, it's only exclusive in Japan, and people are begging it to be released for the West, please. Also on PS4 and Switch, like First Departure, obviously. But yeah, obviously Destiny is more popular because it had, an actual direct sequel with Destiny 2, and a stupid decision from Bamco to put the North American release of Eternia to rebrand it into Destiny 2 blew bowling many, thinking that they were getting an actual direct sequel to Destiny 2 when they found out it had no connection of Tales of Destiny whatsoever. And obviously we could also highlight the fact that Star Ocean 2 also had an anime adaptation, and pretty much, yeah, I would have to say that Tales of Destiny is of course the rival to Star Ocean 2. Or is it? Because there's actually another contender for it to be the rival of Star Ocean 2, and this may be an interesting pick, and that would be Tales of Eternia. And there's only one factor that is other than being on the PSP and PS1 like Star Ocean 2, and it's a special trope that both Star Ocean 2 and Tales of Eternia would introduce. For Eternia, it was the whole thing about, for Star Ocean 2 was the whole thing about on how people from a, high developed advanced sci-fi, civilization, all that stuff, people from the future in a sense with modern technology would crash land onto an underdeveloped planet, which would become a running theme in things like Star Ocean 3, Star Ocean 4, and Star Ocean 6 with Raymond's side, while Tales of Eternia would introduce the whole two worlds at war trope, just like which will later be brought back with Tales of Symphonia, Tales of Exilia, and Tales of Arise. So yeah, I do think that this was a little bit of an interesting and difficult choice, but if I had to pick, I would say that the rivals to Star Ocean 2 Second Evolution, the second story, would have to be both Tales of Destiny and also Tales of Eternia. And now we get to Star Ocean 3 Till the End of Time, and my pick for its rivals is actually another two, just like how I mentioned with Star Ocean 2, and that would have to be both Tales of Symphonia and Tales of the Abyss. Now why is the fact? Let's go with the Symphonia side, and that is that both games were released somewhere around the early 2000s, with Symphonia and actually both Star Ocean 3 both releasing around initially in Japan in 2003, while later versions of it will come a year later in 2004, and both of them were, of course, the first games to be have the respective series in full 3D, which was a major selling point, and obviously most of them would have full-on voice acting. It was a huge turnaround for their games in the respective series, and that's mainly the aspect, and both of them were sort of ambitious in a sense. Now what does Tales of the Abyss have to bring to the equation other than being an extension of what Symphonia's concepts, but more expanded in a sense? And that is that all these games are sort of ambitious in a way with the whole storytelling. Obviously Symphonia is more around its plot twist and the whole fact that it's actually connected to the first game, while in the case of Abyss, it was more of, they took an ambitious risk with the storytelling of how portraying its main character, Luke, on his character development. Now obviously Star Ocean 2 doesn't have a whole lot other than its ambition was mainly not only being inspired by Star Trek, but also having probably the most infamous twist in all, probably having at least one of the most infamous twists in all video games. So much so that it was completely set in the very far future, and as such, no other Star Ocean games took place after the events of Star Ocean 3 whatsoever. So I think in a sense that those games alone with their ambitious storytelling, mainly for how they're connected and took risks, is what makes them similar in a standpoint, and the fact that they're all in 3D and both were released in around the 2000s. As well as the fact that Star Ocean 2 was released for the PS2, which both Abyss and Symphonia were on. And if you want to go even further, both Star Ocean 3 and Tales of Symphonia did get recent releases of not so great ports. I mean, Symphonia with its remastered recently on PS4, Xbox One, and Switch wasn't great, especially if you were playing this on the Switch, which, oh my god, Bamco, just why did you do that? Just why? As for Star Ocean 3, it did get a port on PS4, but it was completely bare bones. It was just an emulated version of the PS2 game, and it didn't have any quality of life features whatsoever. It was you were basically playing a PS2 game at heart with no more bells or whistles. So yeah, I'll just say that this was an interesting thing, is that obviously Star Ocean 3 has two rivals, and that is what I would personally state, and that is the rivals for Star Ocean 3 Till the End of Time are both Tales and Symphonia and Tales of the Abyss. Next we go into Star Ocean 4 The Last Hope, and my pick for its rivals would have to be Tales of Vesperia, as well as bringing back Tales of Symphonia and Tales of Grace's F. Now what's the Symphonia part for, Star Ocean 4? The main thing really is that both of them, as I stated back into my first Departure Fantasia segment, is that they're both prequels of the first game of their respective series. I mean, Fantasia obviously follows up from Symphonia, and First Departure follows up from The Last Hope, and both obviously would have references and tie-ins to make sure that obviously they are prequels to those respective games. But what is with the Vesperia side really? That's mainly due to the fact that both games were obviously released around the early 2010s, around 2008 and 2009, and obviously the Xbox 360 was a big deal for RPGs, as many Japanese companies would like to put their RPGs and games on that to test, and obviously everyone was going crazy for it, especially with Bandai Namco, Square Enix, and Sega. And also Mistwalker, obviously, with Mistwalker having things like Lost Odyssey and Blue Dragon, Bandai Namco with Tales of Vesperia as well as Eternal Sonata, and Square Enix going on with, of course, I believe, Infinite Undiscovery, as well as, of course, Star Ocean The Last Hope, and Sega with Resonance of Fate. And those three games were obviously made by, none other than Trice. And that's pretty much what they have in common, really, is mainly the release timing, and both combat-wise are sort of similar in a sense. Obviously, Star Ocean is a little bit more ambitious, given the fact that it took things that were teased upon from the last game, and that was obviously to explore more worlds more freely, while having a more advanced an upgraded combat system. And I would say the combat system in Vesperia and Star Ocean 4 is absolutely great. But I would also have to pick on also Tales of Grace's F, because mainly it's the combat things that both Star Ocean 4 and Tales of Grace's F both exceed in, being the fact that they have very fast and fun-based combat, and also have focus on dodging things, with of course Star Ocean focusing on blind sides, and also Grace's F with its whole quickstep thing. And both of them have really fast combat, and obviously at the time both of them were really well received. Obviously Star Ocean 4 has more mixed reception, and Vesperia nowadays has also got mixed reception, but both were somewhat praised and just admired on how they were, a big deal for the Xbox 360. And also not to the fact that, they would absolutely even get PS3 releases a year after release, with Vesperia having more content, which would at least get, expanded upon, which would actually get ported a long time ago, obviously with its recent remastered, its definitive edition. And obviously Star Ocean 4 International was just an over improvement of its Xbox 360 version. And obviously both Star Ocean 4 and Vesperia will obviously get remasters and come to PS4 as well as PC as well, while obviously Vesperia will be a little bit more flexible for the Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. And while Star Ocean 4 didn't get that lucky, its 360 version was backwards compatible with the Xbox One and the Xbox Series in a sense. And also not to bring the fact that in 2019, the same year that Vesperia got remastered, I also want to bring the fact that Star Ocean First Departure was also remastered on the same year as Vesperia. So I do think that overall it's obviously a mix, but I'd say that the general majority of the comparison between Star Ocean 4 would have to go with Tales of Vesperia with a little bits of more Graces F and Symphonia. So my pick for the counterparts for Star Ocean 4 would have to be both Tales of Symphonia, Tales of Vesperia, and Tales of Graces F. And now we get on to Star Ocean 5, Integrity and Faithlessness. And my pick, well, this one was probably the most difficult one to pick, and I have no idea on how I can even bring myself to say this. But if I had to pick one game, its rival, if you can call it that, if it had any rivals, it would have to be Tales of Zestiria. And why? Why is the fact? Well, other than the fact that both of them are cross-gen games, I mean, they were both the last, technically one of the last, well, with Zestiria's case, it was one of the last games to be on the PS3 and would also come to the PS4 at the same time. And the same goes with the case for Star Ocean 5 being the last Star Ocean game for 7th gen consoles and the first for 8th gen consoles. And both, well, obviously released around 2016, well, but in the case of Zestiria came around 2015 in Japan, and a year later in the West, 2016. And I'm mostly bringing it up because both of them had some interesting ideas and concepts, and both of them weren't well received. Obviously, Star Ocean 5 and Tales of Zestiria goes for two completely different things. In the case for Zestiria's case, obviously it tried to shake up some things. It tried to go back to its whole medieval fantasy storytelling, its whole setting. It also had Shina, who worked on Legendia, collaborating with Vittorio Sagraba. It was also the 20th anniversary Tales game, and also tried to also be having more open environments and had some neat concepts. While in the cases of Star Ocean 5, they tried to go smaller scale after the over ambition of Star Ocean 4, where obviously it set back to basics of it being with the main protagonist being on an undeveloped world, just like with Star Ocean 1, and being a part of a conflict that will involve, bigger thing happening in the whole universe. But mostly speaking, is that they had this idea of having, more than 4 player members on screen in battle, having seamless transition battles, which both actually even Zestiria also tried that as well, technically with seamless transition battles in a sense. And obviously it wasn't well executed from how battles went, and obviously the fact that Star Ocean 5 tried this idea of having mostly of the cutscenes set into this in-game real-time thing where everything was still in place and it was not actually full-on cutscenes. It was just obviously you're playing the game and you have like many people just talking around important dialogue and story scenes, and yeah, it just wasn't well executed. Both Zestiria and Star Ocean 5 would get their fair share of controversy and as such. Now, obviously that pains my heart, obviously, to compare the two because both of them are different. Point is, those games tried to do some things, but they didn't really execute them well, and that's probably what got them, obviously, lots of controversy and hate. And obviously they had some remedy for it. Obviously Berseria came around a year, which sort of tried to remedy the situation. And as for Star Ocean 5, it didn't have much to remedy other than the fact that with the whole mobile game still going at the time before its cancellation, and the fact that newer releases of prior Star Ocean games were coming to modern platforms was the closest thing to sort of, remedy the whole Star Ocean thing, and to hope that people are guessing that Star Ocean is still alive and kicking. So yeah, it was really a tough call, but if I had to pick what is the quote-unquote rival for Star Ocean 5 Integrity Faithlessness, it would have to be Tales of Hysteria, as much as I don't like to say it. And then we come to the last bit, and that is Star Ocean Divine Force, the recent Star Ocean entry, and my pick for its rival will have to be none other than, well, Tales of Arise. Obviously the fact that both of them are anniversary games also, with Arise celebrating the 25th anniversary of the series, and Star Ocean Divine Force sort of celebrating 25 series of, obviously Star Ocean, which is what the PS storefront says as a special 25th commemorative project of the Star Ocean series. And obviously both of them took things from past games and added some new elements. Obviously with Arise, the biggest change of the series was the whole graphics and the fact that the combat was a little bit more free run but more fast paced and fluid, in spite of the likes of Tales of Grace's F, and obviously with the whole graphical style and the fact they added some references of past Tales games as an anniversary title, as well as the fact that, well, exploration, while not a huge selling point, was still enough, and the fact that, well, people absolutely loved the story and characters of Tales of Rise and absolutely loved the combat. It won new fans already over, it won critics over, and even won some Tales fans also, even if there was some controversy about of it being a real Tales game or not, just as well as making some changes, obviously, like with the whole on how skits are portrayed, and obviously getting rid of the whole victory screens and other bits that ruffle some veteran fans' feathers. Now with Star Ocean Divine Force, it's a little bit more different on the fact that obviously while they brought some staples back, like the whole split story with Claude, with Raymond and Letitia from Second Story, as well as the fact they have, a combat system that's really brand new and different compared to any other Star Ocean game, with its whole AP system, as opposed to Rise, where it brought back normal attacks but still had that whole, soul system that Berseria had. And not only that, but also the fact that Star Ocean 6 was the first game to have the series in a more open zone environment thing, where the emphasis of exploration was to have your Duma explore these massive environments, which was a huge selling point, as well as combat being very fast paced. With Arise, obviously it had fast combat, but it was mainly focusing on around team attacks, doing chain combos and killing enemies very quickly, insta-killing them. While in the case of, obviously, Star Ocean 6, it was mainly just around high-speed, fast-paced combat of killing enemies fast with using your Duma and having blindsides, a feature in Star Ocean 4 Return, to really dish a lot of damage. And obviously Star Ocean 6 had made some changes compared to other series. It had obviously an actual skill tree as opposed to, well, buying skill books from villages to gain new skills, which was a good idea, honestly. And obviously, while I don't think anyone has mentioned it before, they don't obviously shout out what their art names are. And obviously the AP system was similar to what Grace's F, Hysteria, Berseria, and technically Arise were, even though obviously Arise had normal attacks in the mix as well, which Star Ocean 6 sadly doesn't. And obviously they obviously have tons of references from both past games. Star Ocean 6 would obviously have this whole SOA mini game where it would have past pieces of all the other Star Ocean games as well as other Trias games. And obviously they will make references to like past games, like mentioning like characters from Star Ocean 2, Star Ocean 2, 4, 5, and 1 in a sense. So yeah, pretty much Star Ocean 6 Divine Force and Tales of Rise are more love letters of the series. Both had absolutely amazing stories, excellent characters, really great combat, solid music from both Motoi Sakuraba, and just were really nothing more but love letters. Obviously Arise was the most successful one, and As for Star Ocean Divine Force, well, it did win some fans, critics, and audiences over. Obviously, we heard that it didn't sell the greatest, and it's unsure really not if Star Ocean will survive after this. Hopefully Star Ocean 6 did well in the West to survive, because honestly I would love to see another Star Ocean game. But overall, I'd say that the rival for Star Ocean Divine Force would have to be none other than Tales of Arise. And obviously we learned something from this video is that the interesting one thing about a Star Ocean release is that they come either a year or close enough to when a new Tales game goes on to a new console generation. So whenever you get a new Tales game for a new console, there would always be like a Star Ocean to come afterwards. Now whether or not that will keep on happening, because we know the fact that there will be a new Tales of game coming sometime soon, and whether or not Trias will be still alive after that financial crisis, and hopefully that Star Ocean 6 did well, will have to be, only time will tell to the end. Anyway guys, that's all I have to say. Thank you guys so much for watching, and were you surprised about this? And guys, let me know in the comments below on what, or have you played any of the Star Ocean or Tales games, and which do you love the most as well. Anyway guys, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Mad Kaiser out.